we certified them. That's the process that went through, and we made sure that as they were entering data into their system, it flowed all the way into ours and landed properly. I think you also get to do audits throughout the year. I know those are always fun, but those are there to help make sure that we have good quality data. But we'll be spending the rest of the time talking about how we do comparisons to ensure that quality of data. Instead of going through all of these, I'll be brief to try to get back some time. But the next two slides will actually talk about the lineage and the importance of it. And that will actually talk why we had to get rid of SACE Online. Currency of data is key. And the reason we have AZ set up so that we would have daily or near real time where we receive data daily is when you go long periods of time sitting on data, the data gets stale. And in that way, when it gets used, it's not accurate or current. How many of you have had a grant integrity in SACE and you found that you had a student that you admitted, but yet SACE wouldn't accept it because another district forgot to do the withdrawal? So, in actual, what's happening there, it's not that you have one district submitting data, and then from a timing aspect, when you submit data 20 days later, there's a lot of stuff happening in between. That's why we're recommending you submit the data daily. That way it's a very small window, and so you won't run across those problems. Standards. We built AZs on the Ed5 standards. The school districts, or the SIS vendors, they also use the Ed5 standards. The reason why that's key is imagine if you have two people, one person speaking Chinese and one person speaking Russia, you put them in a room and you say, go build this. It doesn't quite work. Unless you're like me, you're going to look at that and then you'll laugh to say, that's how I feel sometimes when I communicate with people. But we are using the Ed5 standards so that we're all on a common language to make sure that when we use our data that's submitted, that it means the same thing. The precision of the data. It's always critical to make sure that you're at the right level of the data. So when we actually calculate ADM, we go out to 4 decimal points. That's an industry standard with financial data. As well as accuracy of the data. Since this is a financial system, we want our data to be 100% matching to your data. Now, I've worked on other systems. I worked on sales and marketing systems. Sometimes people are happy when the data is 60% accurate because they're just trying to use the data to make some high-level decisions. You guys are paid on this data, so we want 100% accuracy. It's very key for us on that. The documentation or the metadata. You guys know this as code values. So if we were to do a withdrawal, we want to capture the code type of, let's say, W1. We're checking to make sure that we have good code values going in so it gets used. And making sure that those code values are communicated out to you and you understand what those are, that's also critical to make sure you're having good, clean, quality data. And of course, the scale. You can't, as far as the financial aspect, we're at the lowest level, which is where we want to be. We're counting students. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about system of record and why it's important. Because in SACE, you have 2 data entry points. You guys submit data through your SIS vendors, and then we have SACE Online. By definition, that means you guys can't be the system of record. Because somebody can go into SACE Online and change it, and then your the AZ system and your system will be out of sync. That's why we had to get rid of SACE Online. That allows us to actually have you guys control the data. It's your data. And then when you submit it, our comparison reports allows us to check what's in your system, what's in our system. And the whole purpose of that is to make sure that they're accurate. And as we go, yes?
I'm so sorry to interrupt. I just want to make a point on behalf of people that use SACE Online. You're exactly right. We don't disagree at all. But because there were so many problems in SACE, in order to get your student information system in sync with SACE, you had to use a tool like SACE Online. So it isn't, from your perspective, I get where you're coming from, but you need to know our perspective too. Hey, we've got a system. The data is completely accurate in our system, but we can't get it to reflect that way in SACE, which was, sorry, but entirely on your end. And so we needed a tool to do that. Now, I totally get that it has to be retired, because what we have to insist upon with our vendors now is if there's a discrepancy, our vendor has to fix it.
Yes.
We can't have another tool. Totally get that. Just wanted to provide the perspective, though, that we've used SACE Online for other reasons than you might have thought.
No, I appreciate that, and I understand that. Thank you. So the other aspect, though, what I want to do is walk through some of the checks that we've had along the way. We have 4 checks when you're submitting data to do comparison on. And each check means something a little different. The transaction reports that we have created, that means data has submitted. And that, think of it as a receipt. Like when you go to a grocery store, you give them cash, they give you a receipt listing everything that you just bought. That's the transaction report. The sole purpose for this report is troubleshooting. And what this report shows is when you have a problem and you look to see did the data get submitted, it's going to show whether your system submitted the data and what the raw form of that is. And then from an ADE standpoint, that's the data that we're receiving. If we don't see that, then that means we didn't receive it. So there may be a problem on our end as far as receiving, or there's a problem with the submittal. And the report shows what's actually being submitted at the very raw form. So that can be used for troubleshooting. The way we've set up AZEDs is there's a gate. I like to think of these as gates. You have to pass through each gate, and then as you pass through, each gate is checking something along the way. So the first gate, verification, that means the data actually landed and it's in our system. So we have reports that show what data landed. Now, it does check for certain items. Was it a complete data set? Was it a required field that got submitted? Because if we don't have the required field, we can't do anything with it. But in conjunction with the transaction report, if you don't see your data on the verification report, you can look on the transaction report to see if it's being sent and see what elements are being sent. So it'll tell you that. Otherwise, you can check the verification reports and know that your data landed and ADE has it. And that's the purpose of those verification reports, comparing your system against AZED's. The integrity report does some different checking. So again, if we think of a withdraw, we need additional data in order to process it correctly. And some of the checks that we do are the business rules or the laws that get implemented. That happens on the integrity side. And when you run those, that gets run nightly. So we'll have a nightly job running it. So the next day, when you have your integrity report, you'll see what the integrities are. And that actually provides value. Those error messages, we spent some time making sure that they provided valuable information. For example, if you are missing data. So if you do a withdrawal, but you forget to submit a withdrawal date, because it's an optional component for the first gate, it's not optional on the second gate. And it will let you know that that is what's needed. And then the last check is the ADM student counts, and we'll have jobs running on that nightly. And that report shows the aggregation and the calculations coming up. And those checks are important, not just now, but throughout the use of the system to making sure the quality of data is there. The reason we wanted to kind of walk you through this is from a comparing aspect. When you're comparing your system to these, we can identify where the problem is fairly easily. Because I know on some of these reports, in SACE, when you run that, for example, if Integrities takes 2 days to run and you pull the report, you don't know if Integrities runs or not. That's why timing is critical, and that's why we have to have these jobs run nightly so that the next day they need to finish. We're also working on a screen to let you know what the status of those jobs are. We haven't had a chance to get to that yet, but we will be getting on that so that you guys know when those jobs run and what state the data is along the way. And then from that, we can determine where the problems are fairly easily. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Keith to kind of talk through a little bit more about the reports that ASCUS has.
So first off, I'm going to show you what we believe are like a SACE process versus the ASCUS process. So right now you send your data to SACE, put it in the upload folder, it gets processed. You can see your student detail import status report, and most of you guys probably run your ADMS 72 and start looking at your data and making sure it's all there. With AZEDS, same type of thing, except for your SIS is actually sending that information. And then you'll have, like Randall mentioned, the trans10 that'll actually show you the transactions that passed and the transactions that failed. And in this case, you'd want to look at those transactions that failed and find out why they're failing. Then you also have all of these other reports, what we're calling the STUD 10, ELL 10, SPED 10, Support 10, Staff 10, and Course 10. So some of these are STC type data, and the others are similar to what you're used to seeing on your 72 and 71, ELL SPED 71s and Support 71s, but they're not replacements for those reports. So I just wanted some of the pilots and staging LEAs. I just talked to a couple of them this morning. They were asking for changes to some of these because they're not exactly like what you're using on the ADMS 72 and the ELL 71 and SPED 71. They're not replacements for that. These are just verification reports to let you know your data landed. And then the bridge that, I don't remember if Randall mentioned that, if I wasn't paying attention, but the bridge that Mark mentioned earlier, we have the data push, the bridge over, for those people that are sending AZEDS data, we're pushing your data up to SACE, and you'll have a Trans 11 report, and this is a SACE, AZEDS to SACE transfer error report, and I'm going to go over this one in a little bit of detail towards the end. I don't have time to go over all the reports, but I thought that since we are pushing, we have, like Mark said, we have 10 LEAs currently sending data into AZEDS, and this is a very important report for those people that are sending data in because you're getting paid out of SACE. So you want to make sure that your data gets from AZEDS to SACE, and this is your kind of your second check to make sure all of your data is going to be making it up into SACE, and then you can look at your SACE reports for all of your additional stuff. So moving on, in SACE you have your integrity report, or your integrity runs, and you get your integrity report. As Randall mentioned, integrity is going to run on a much more frequent basis in AZEDS. Right now we're running that on a daily basis. Mark mentioned hopefully we'll be able to run that even more often, but right now it's daily. So those are kind of similar. And then we're going to have similar reports. They're not there yet, but when aggregation runs, you have ADMS 75 and ELL 75, etc. On the AZ side, we're going to have the same types of reports. As Mark mentioned, we're trying to, we didn't really hit the mark with some of the first reports that we have out here, so we are trying to look at some ways to make the ADM reports, if you want to call them, or screens, whatever we end up doing, a little bit more informative, I guess I should say. Provide you all the information you need and not have to run 10 different reports to get your information. So we are looking at that. We actually have developers that are analyzing the current reports and the requirements that we got from the focus group, and they're actually starting to work on that. He's part-time right now on our team, but he's slated to start working on that the end of the month, beginning of October. So one of Mark's slides had a link to some report information. Here I've given a little bit deeper link. There's actually a specific page for AZ reports. And on this there is a lot of information on that page, and it's a buried page, so if you didn't know about it, you know how AD website is, there's a lot of information, and you kind of got to know which links to click to get there. So I'm just going to go briefly over it. There's a development process. It just kind of explains the process we go through to develop the reports. Then there is actually a tab in there that shows the development status of the reports. So the ones that I showed you on the previous page that we already have done, the STUD 10 and the ELL 10, etc., those will show that they're finished and they're actually out in production. It also shows you those reports that are that are in development and or in QA or in user acceptance testing, etc. And they're on that exact same page, on the far right column for right now, and we're looking to move that over to the left. It actually shows you what your current SACE report is in comparison to what we're going to be calling it in AZEDS. We're trying to keep the naming convention as similar as possible, but we are changing some of them to hopefully make a little bit better sense. But we will, I've already talked to our technical writer and asked her to move that SACE report to be the very first column, because that's what you guys are used to seeing. You want to go in and see what is my ADMS 71 going to be called in AZEDS, or whatever report you're looking for. So she's going to be working on that to get it moved over. There's also a projected release schedule, and we update that every couple of weeks. You know, as resources change and things happen, we have to change the schedules or move the schedules up. Actually, just found out yesterday that hopefully we'll be able to deliver our next report, which is the student membership information report, the one you guys currently run for one SACE ID at a time. We're hopefully going to be able to deliver that in the next 2 weeks to UAT, and then hopefully if that passes UAT, we'll be able to get that out in another couple of weeks after that. So we're shooting for the first part of October to release that. So you'll be able to see all of your information about one student at a time on one single report. And the bonus on that, the focus group asked if we could make it so we could run it for multiple students. So we've made it so you can run it for up to 10 student unique IDs at a single time. So you don't have to run and run and run. So hopefully you guys will like that. And we totally changed the layout. It doesn't take 10 pages. It's shrunk down in not having a whole bunch of white space on the right-hand side. So. Also documentation. So even if you're not on AZEDS yet and you're planning on going next month or the following month, there's documentation on all the reports that we've delivered thus far on this website. You can go out there and look at the quick reference guides that we have. It'll give you an idea of what the reports look like. They all have sample reports, and our technical writer has explained what everything on the page is, etc. So go out there and start looking at it, so when you do go to AZEDS, you'll at least know what these reports are and how to run them, etc. So AZEDS roles in AD Connect. The thing that Karen showed, that was brand new to me too. That must have gotten, she said, I think it just got pushed out last night. I had no idea that I could go in and look at AZ Dash, because that's where all of our reports are, and see the roles associated with AZ Dash. Across the top, you'll see the roles that we have, and I've shortened them. They all start with AZEDS Data Coordinator, and then they say dash base reports, dash ELL reports, etc. So these are the reports that are currently out there, and I've marked the role that you have to have in order to see the reports. My other slide, it had all 30 reports up here, but then it got really small, like Mark's big picture, and you couldn't read them all. So the documentation that goes out in the EA email every other week that Lori mentioned actually specifies the report that is associated with the role. So the base reports, it says that all 6 of those reports, if you give them the base reports role, they get access to all 6 of these reports. So trying to keep that all up to date. And the other stuff that the AD Connect team is working on for this information, we update them as well to say what role, with what permit role, what reports do you get. So hopefully we'll keep that all up to date and make sure you're all informed. The one role we don't have any reports for yet is the NCLB report role, and those are some future reports. the Support 72 and Support 73, the NCLB 1 and 2 indicator reports. The one has the aggregated and the details. Those will be assigned to that role, but those are not yet complete. So I've got 3 minutes to talk about the AZEDS to SACE transfer error report. As I mentioned earlier, this is a key report if you are pushing data into AZEDS, because this is the report that shows you when we attempted to push your data up to SACE, all of the errors that happened. So just across I'm going to go across the grid there on the bottom. So we tell you the transaction ID that we tried to create, the student state ID, which you guys are currently used to calling SACE ID. We're kind of changing the name because we're not going to be in SACE anymore. First name, last name, middle name, the date that that we tried to transfer it, the record ID. I'm not sure why that's really there. That's really like your vendor ID number, but when we're pushing it up, it's all the same number. So I may go back to the designer of this report and see if we can actually expand the error message and get rid of that record ID, unless there's some sort of a reason that they had that on there. And then the error message is actually a SACE, XML schema definition error message. So it's not a very legible error message, but this is the error message that comes back from SACE when we try to import the data. So in this example, I have, I guess I went through all of those things. So in the example, I know you guys in the back couldn't see it, but the very first couple of LEAs that we had submitting data, even in our staging environment, the records that you're submitting now don't match one-to-one to your SACE. So you're not sending up a transaction 1 in AZEDS. You're sending up a student information record, you're sending up another one that's a student school association record, then a parent association record, where a lot of that information was all in a single transaction previously in SACE. So in AZEDS, if you only send us a student, but you don't send us a parent guardian record that has somebody marked as the primary parent guardian, then you'll get all of these error messages that I'm showing here, because we don't have a first name and a last name of the primary guardian. So that is one thing that you need to look at. So if you start submitting data and you just submit a whole bunch of student information and a whole bunch of student school associations, I mean, that's great. Now we know that you are the one that's reporting that student, but your data is going to fail when we try to send it to SACE until you send us all of that additional information.
Just a note on that, and I'll be completely honest, the error message is extremely ugly. And if we were to try to fix the error message so that we could try to provide something that's clean, it would take us a few months. And with SACE going away, this report goes away in a year, so there wasn't it didn't make sense to put all our efforts in that. That's why we're building out AZEDS. But what we are doing is we do have the help center so that you can actually go online and look at problems for reports. We are putting the common English phrase for those error messages out there so that it will explain them a little bit better. So if you do see something and you go, what is this? You can go online and actually look for that error message, and it'll actually give you what's missing. Like, for example, the responsible party may be missing on that, but the error message may not say that. So we do understand, apologize, in order to actually give good error messages, we have to go through all these possibilities of what could go wrong and try to fix that, and it was going to take too long.
So for those who haven't read the cartoon, I'll let you read the cartoon and I'll pause. Okay, so hopefully you can see the picture. It says, I'll pause for a moment so you can let this information sink in. I know we've had 6 presentations today, a lot of information. We want to know what we didn't give you. I know we're 15 minutes late for lunch. I will hang around for another 15 minutes if you want to ask me some questions. And then there's actually an email address here. This goes to our AZ support group. not Colleen's group, but if you just have questions about AZET's reports, and you're not in production, you're not having issues. If you're having issues, send it to AD support so we go through the right process. But if you just have questions, send them to here and it'll get escalated up to me and I will respond back to you. Thanks, everybody.